Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our third annual diversity panel at Black Hat. I'd like to start by introducing Kelly Jackson Higgins, Executive Editor of Dark Reading. She'll be leading our panel as the moderator and introducing our panelists. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica. I just wanted to say, just for starters, what we're trying to do here today, I think that's really important. There's been a lot of discussion in the industry about how the number of women and minorities has basically stayed flat, the data. But there are things going on. There are initiatives, projects, programs that companies are working on and organizations are working on to remedy that. And that's what we want to highlight here a little bit today. But to set the table a little bit, I just wanted to give you just some of the stats that always depress me. Because I say the same stats every year. This is the third one of these we've done. 1/10 of the workforce is made up of minorities. And women are still at the 10 to 11% of the industry, and that number stayed flat for about 3 years easily. Retention is still not great. And meanwhile, we have 1 million jobs wide open to fill worldwide, and that number is going to double by 2022. So we have this industry with a ton of jobs, and it's not reaching out to a lot of different people and communities. So that's what we want to talk about today. So without further ado, I want to introduce my amazing panel here. And their bios are incredible. I had to actually truncate their bios, and I hated doing it because they all have amazing stories and experience, but I'll let them show that to you and tell you in their discussions. But to my left here is Mary Cheney, who's the CEO of MBS Information Security Consulting. She's also the Vice President of the International Consortium of Minority Security Professionals. She's a former attorney who worked on IP infringement cases, and she was also an FBI special agent who investigated cybercrime cases, DDoS attacks, internet piracy, and computer intrusion cases. So she's had quite a experience, and she also was the information system security officer for the FBI in LA. She also had senior security roles at Comcast, Johnson & Johnson, and GE Capital. So I'm very glad to have Mary here with us today. Next. And that's the shortened version of her bio, the shortened version. Okay, in the middle there we have Rick Howard, who's the CISO for security company Palo Alto Networks. He has overall responsibility for the company's internal security program there. He leads their threat intelligence team called Unit 42, you might be familiar with. He directs their company's efforts on the Cyber Threat Alliance information sharing nonprofit. Rick was formerly the Task CISO iDefense General Manager, Counterpane SOC Director, and commander of the U.S. Army's Computer Emergency Response Team, where he coordinated network defense, network intelligence, and network attack operations for the Army's global network. Welcome, Rick. He's our one and only security vendor here, so we're proud to have him. To the left of Rick is Aubrey Blanche, who's the global head of diversity and inclusion at Atlassian. Aubrey works with teams across the business to enhance access to technical education, recruiting, retention, and career mobility for underrepresented minorities. She also serves as an advisor to the She Starts Accelerator, and she's co-founder of Sycamore, which is a community that aims to close the funding gap for underrepresented founders. Welcome, Aubrey. And last but not least, Anthony, wait in there. Anthony Johnson, who's the Managing Director and Business Information Security Officer for the Corporate Investment Bank at JP Morgan Chase & Company. He's the Managing Director responsible for all things cybersecurity, including emerging threats, risk mitigation, protection of the firm's data and system assets. And he started his career in the US Air Force, where he focused on computer and network security. He's had various senior cybersecurity leadership roles in big companies in retail and global finance. Most recently, he was the global CISO for Fannie Mae. So that's who you have here to listen to. So again, the goal here is to talk about what's going on out there so we can put this into context. So I kind of wanted to start with Anthony because JP Morgan has a pretty aggressive diversity program and culture, and we talked a little bit about it, but I was hoping, Anthony, you could tell us what a diversity program actually looks like.
Sure. So within JP Morgan, we actually recognize that there's one way to try to solve the problem. We recognize there's a problem, everybody's talking about it. But there's one way you could just say, hey, we're just gonna hire more people. But that doesn't actually solve the problem for 2 years down the road. So what we're looking at is, we're looking at it, we call it a pipeline problem. And we're looking at how do we actually bring in and train and groom people that are gonna be the people who run the program 5-10 years from now. So within the diversity program within JP, we actually have a number of things, one called Grassroots, where we do a lot of mentorship. We actually take diverse candidates, internal, external, and we look at how do we grow them, how do we make sure that they have training, education, et cetera. But we're also doing a lot of outreach to middle schools, colleges, et cetera, just to really make sure that we, I guess, plant the roots, if you will, into it. Because what we're seeing is that the candidates, when they're coming from college, most women, minorities have already self-selected out before they hit that freshman year. So it becomes much more of an uphill battle to say, hey, you can't, this is something you can or should do or should look at. So we have a lot of, we have mentorships being assigned. We have a big focus on mobility. So we move people from doing, you might be doing SOC operations, and then we'll say, you know what, here's another well-rounded skill set that you need. And then we have a lot of direct opportunity of sitting down with growth coaches for senior people. So associates may have direct access to a managing director that'll say, hey, let me help you navigate your career. Here's what I did. Then the final thing I would say is there's a whole program around where there's men advocating real change. We call it MARC. So we look at what are the people that are currently in these very senior leadership roles, and how do they translate or share the story of how they've impacted somebody else's life? Because what we see is that a lot of candidates growing up, they don't actually have a mental model to aspire to, and they don't actually have someone to say, you know what, here's how you actually do it. But there's a ton of ways we're doing it in JP.
I want to go to Mary because you guys do a lot with the mentorship piece of this, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, with ICMCP, we have several different programs that we're trying to utilize to increase the numbers of women and minority. You mentioned the numbers and paltry numbers that they are. Women at 11%, minorities at, I would say Hispanic and blacks are probably about 7% or something like that. So we have several different programs, one being the Mentor Protege program, where we actually take students or individuals that are early in their career and match them with one of our executive leaders to mentor. They have a formal mentorship program. We also give away scholarships and training for those that are in the industry that want to continue learning and things like that. And one of the more exciting things that we're doing is we're reaching back into colleges, and we're actually partnering with universities as well as industry partners to create what's called an Educational Security Operations Center. So these ESOCs that we have that are going on college campuses to actually build out a SOC environment for students to be able to not only go from the classroom, but into an environment where they're looking at security alerts, essentially what their level 1 type of job would be in security and coming out of college. And we're actually giving them practical experience. There are different versions or flavors of it. Some of it is actually, data that we're piping in from industry. Some of it is data that is university-based data. And so they're actually looking at these things and actually hands-on. So, and then you have, if you have the 3 pieces to the puzzle, of course, you have the college and university, you have the ICMCP, which is acting as the subject matter expert of how to build out the Security Operations Center, and then you have an industry partner, like a JP Morgan Chase, for instance, if they wanted to adopt a SOC. So they have their name on this SOC, and then now they're able to say, okay, well, I know I have a pipeline of people that I need, and I have this university that I'm sponsoring. So now that talent is exposed to this company, and they could actually, transition into that.
I was going to ask you, even going younger with some of the projects you guys have done.
Yeah, I think we all recognize that there's 2 pieces to this problem, right? One is you have to make sure that women and minorities are interested and trained in our field, right? And then you have to keep them interested and cultivate them once they get into the job force, right? So on the first problem, we're piloting a program, or we have been piloting a program with the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and the CIO I'm working with is over there, Kurt Carver, okay? And the idea is that we identify high school kids early, okay, and get them into nerdy contests that are fun, all right, like capture the flag contests, all right, and sponsor that and give the winners scholarships if they matriculate up to University of Alabama when they go to college. But what's important about this program, though, is that we keep spinning the plate. We just don't give them money and let them go for a while. We keep coming back year after year, talking to those same students, encouraging them, giving them swag, making them interns in our company, okay, and then hopefully we will hire them when they're at the back end of that pipeline. So we're in our 2nd year of that project, so it's a long-term thing, but I'm very encouraged on how it's going so far.
Aubrey, do you have some insights on this as well? I know
Yeah.
she's literally the head of diversity at her company, so.
Yeah, I think I feel like you covered a lot of great pipeline things, but one of the other things that you mentioned in the beginning was around retention. So what we know is this is true across all sort of technical fields, that even for the folks that come in, folks who identify as female or as racial minorities also tend to have higher attrition. And a really great piece of research that came out in March that covers more general tech, but would certainly speak to cyber as well, is that the #1 cause of leaving is mistreatment. And when I look at the data that I've seen across Atlassian and when I was at Palantir previously, it usually wasn't sort of outright problems, but rather this perception that people weren't being judged according to their capabilities. And so one of the things that we've done to drive attrition across security, but also other specialties, is we've actually redesigned a lot of our internal back office HR processes, which sounds completely unsexy.
It does.
Right? But what it does is by actually designing those processes in a way that eliminates as much as possible the subjective bias that creeps into our evaluations of people's talent and potential, we've actually been able to create more objective environments. And I think it's easy to see how that works in recruiting, where we've gone from we were hiring about 10% folks into technical roles, women 2 years ago, and now that number is at 18%. And for our graduate engineers, that's now 57%.
But I think it's more overt than that. I mean, I understand there's subtle bias, right? But there's overt bias. And I'm glad to see there's so many men in this room, because this is a man problem, okay? It's the old white guys in charge of the engineers, right, who don't call it out when it happens in your meetings, right? And you should not allow sexism jokes to happen inside your organization. You should encourage your female engineers who are very promising to speak out and give us their point of view, right? And if you're not doing that, you will never, ever fix this problem.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece. I mean, we talk about diversity in cybersecurity, but there's actually there's multiple tracks in the world of cybersecurity. And when you look at the actually minority cut on being technical roles versus non-technical, it's an even greater chasm from that perspective, right? You see people that I think that minority and women's have a higher likelihood to be more in a generalized risk role as opposed to a hands-on developer role, right? So making sure that we have programs that train, groom, grow, those are really important things to do, and supporting those engineers when they're trying to talk about something and it just looks like they're getting cut down for no reason.
Yeah, there's actually really great research that shows that women are twice as likely to be interrupted while speaking in a meeting.
What are you saying? I'm sorry.
But also, the other is there's this, I love that you brought up meetings, because yeah, right, when that happens 3, 4, 5 times to you, you just stop sharing because you don't think there's a point. But the other idea is what's called idea co-optation. So a lot of times people who come from an underrepresented background will put forth an idea, and then the group will kind of pass right in a brainstorming phase, and someone from a well-represented group will say almost the same thing 15 minutes later, and the group will decide it's a good idea then. Right? Like, I can tell you, every time that's happened to me, like, no one meant to do it. But those things are really consequential, because over time, they communicate that that person isn't going to have an upward trajectory or growth. And so what I've seen is that when folks tend to leave, they don't tend to leave their field, they tend to go to different industries and do the same jobs. And that's what high tech sort of struggles with, is that lots of those technical folks are still doing technical roles, but they're going to a Walmart instead of staying sort of in the valley.
So I have a question for this group, right? I was on a diversity panel last month, and one of the audience members was an HP female systems engineer, right? And she very bravely got in front of this big crowd and said, I'm Hispanic, and my culture already means I'm supposed to defer to men, right? And I'm in a room full of old white guys, and I'm now, that's multiplied. And she was looking for strategies for her that she could overcome some of that, and there weren't a lot offered. So I'm wondering, I would push that to this group. What would you say to her?
A Hispanic female, well, you have ultimately, those cultural distinctions that are threaded through the diversity issues. So it's not just, a black female, it's a Hispanic female, and what that culture means, and how that plays out. I think it's a matter of confidence and encouragement. So some of the coping mechanisms that I myself use is I rely upon, my friends around me and mentors, and that's where it's missed. So women are historically more likely to stay with a company where they feel valued and their opinions are valued and they have a support system, right? So they actually have people that are vested in seeing them succeed. So it would take her to have potentially a male mentor to protect her, so to speak, and say, no, I want your opinion. As you pointed out, when you see it and you call it out, and sometimes it's a personal issue. We just need to get over it. But a lot of times when your voice is silenced, and I've had this happen, you start to lose interest, right? And your voice gets silenced after meeting after meeting after meeting, and then you say, okay, well, forget it. Right, you're not going to get my best. So now I'm mailing it in, and now I'm counting the days. So when you have that, inclusion doesn't happen organically, right?
There is a difference, though.
It's purposeful.
I think there is a difference, though. I absolutely agree that minorities and women need more mentorship, but I think there's a big gap where they also need more sponsorship, and there's a distinction between the two. And when you have somebody who's actually a sponsor, they're willing to take a swing for you, and that goes a long way. Because some of the biggest problems that we have in this whole space is when you look up the food chain, right? I can look at the number of African American CISOs at a Fortune 100 company. They're very few.
It's like a unicorn.
Fortune 100 is one.
It's one, yeah.
And so even as I look at this corporate investment bank, largest investment bank in the world, I'm the only African American in the security organization. So from a leadership perspective, and so when you look up the food chain, there's not many people who look like you or they don't have the same gender or whatever it is. And so having a sponsor, somebody who can advocate for you and take that swing, but also I would say the way you kind of challenge that fundamental problem or that cultural aspect is shadow somebody who is senior, right? So within CIB, a great woman, Lori Beer, she's a CIO. She's amazing to watch, right? And there are cases where, and even myself, I'm like, can I just shadow you for the day? Because the way she presents and the way she uses everything about her to have those meaningful discussions, she didn't actually. I've never seen her, shirk back from a tough conversation. But when you have women that mentor or shadow her, and they start to pull that forward, it becomes a really powerful catalyst.
So your advice to this Hispanic engineer was to find a mentor that the way she does things and glom on, right?
I think so. I would say.
And that's very important to shadow and being visible. I think being on stage, for instance, and having access to people or seeing people that look like you. Because again, just like Anthony and many of the corporate roles that I've held, you're the only one, right? At the executive level, the only one. That's a burden at times. And but I have different individuals that look up to me, and I mentor. I think I'm up to 20 now, individuals, men and women that I mentor, that they just want access to somebody up there because they're just looking to get there, and they don't have it within their own companies. Even companies that have formalized mentor programs or mentor match programs, there's a gap there that's missing. That sponsorship is missing, and again, that visibility and actually being out there helps someone get the courage. I've had many of my mentees that I've had, they just saw me on stage and they called me. Right? And they're like, okay, well, they reached out to me. So that's important as well. So shadowing the right person, because there are some bad behaviors out there. Shadowing the right person and actually, taking those personality traits and finding that courage. A lot of times with women specifically, no matter across the board, culturally, it's a confidence issue more than it is a competence issue.
I would also say, and I feel uniquely qualified to say this as I think the Hispanic woman on stage, which is the other thing is mentorship and sponsorship are so crucial, but you also run into a numbers game, right? Where you look upward and there's 5 people who you can identify with in some way, and so you seek them for mentors. And so I also tell people to seek out peers who want to help you out. That's so true. I have done this, so I can speak from experience. I had a white male colleague who was like, I feel like I'm always shoving myself into the meeting. And so I actually just told him that, and he was on my team. And so he actually started going, hey, Aubrey, what do you think? Right, and he knew that. And so he was creating space because he knew that people would pay attention when he asked what I thought. And it only took a little bit of time of me doing that where I felt more comfortable, but people were also creating space so I didn't have to fight in. So it was, 15 seconds of his life, but it was hugely consequential, and it helped solve some of that confidence gap because basically, like, I said something and didn't die at the same time. And so I think that can also be really crucial, is that senior leaders are amazing and sponsorship is essential, but that everybody has a part to play in creating that. And so don't think that you have to wait until you have a fancy job title to do something that's really meaningful.
For the men in the room, okay, don't wait to be asked. Look for those opportunities, right? Please look for those opportunities.
I want to go back to the core issue here, though, that you guys touched on, and that is the inherent bias issue, because I think that is the elephant in the room. It's magnified right now in our culture, right now, unfortunately. And how do you, Anthony, that's a good question for how your company handles that, because it's not just the people coming in, but the existing people in the company have to feel some ownership and understanding, empathy, all those things. We talked about the psychology of this whole thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys handle that whole, how do you break the cycle of inherent bias and people opening up a little bit?
There's a couple ways that we're doing it, thank you. One, obviously, is we are absolutely looking at, the diversity slate. What I mean by that is when we have a new role, whether it's for internal mobility, somebody coming in, from outside of the firm, we say, okay, how many people out of 10 are actually representative of a diverse background or, gender diversity? And before you actually start to put a focus on that, you realize, wow, 90% of the people all look the same for the same role, right? And it creates this inherent bias because you have people who maybe they've worked at different companies, they've had different relationships, they worked with this great engineer, he was great. You have 10 of these people, and they grabbed all different 10 male engineers who did this. And it's not to say that none of those people are qualified, but nobody's actually considering, any of these other candidates. One of the other ways we're tackling it internally is we started to look at the promotion slate. And we said, okay, hey, we have somebody who's coming up for promotion. Let's talk about what they've done. Then you realize that, well, we don't have as many women or minorities on there. Well, why is that? Well, we actually don't have as many women or minorities running some of these most key initiatives, the key biggest programs. So we actually look at that from a diversity component as well. For our key initiatives, key programs, how many are actually being led by a women or minority perspective? Because that actually, again, tackles that pipeline problem, right? So it tackles the promotion component so that the pipeline for promotion becomes easier. It tackles the, you've been working in industry, and, oh, I know somebody who ran that great program at this other place. Now it's a greater likelihood that they're a woman or minority perspective there. So those are some of the ways that we're really tackling it. It's just I think that all firms need to do something to tackle the pipeline. And I think that everybody needs to do something to see how do I help facilitate this pipeline discussion, right? Raise your hand, say, you know what, I can absolutely do that. Let me run that thing as opposed to just being that silent contributor on the project.
How do you kind of identify that, though, in the job selection or the job employee process when you're hiring and looking at resumes? Is there like a formula for being able to pull out, to sort of reach out or pull out more diverse candidates? How do you?
Yeah, so actually, yes. There's a lot of things that we actually track. So obviously when people are submitting in, we've gone down the route of having discussions of do we have completely blind, discussions, meaning do we take the name and gender off of this, or right now we're currently going through the process of we're just tracking it, okay, tracking it and making sure that it's representative with the targets. Because what we're finding is that because the pipeline is so sparse, the candidates that we can apply to them, we have to go out and coach them almost, right? It's, hey, we've heard that you're a great person. We want to have a conversation with you, but we're not doing that at just the senior level, right? It's the mid-junior level person as well. So it's a day-to-day fight.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the other things that's really powerful about bias is actually talking about it, right? So there's tons of research that shows that, shockingly, unconscious bias training doesn't completely rewire your neurochemistry. And that said, I think there is still value to training if it's executed well, which is that by creating a dialogue in which you teach people about how they process information, and specifically when they're talking about competencies, right, around job skills, all of a sudden people start to see their own meanings And so you start to see groups that self-correct. So that's something that we've seen is just by making it okay to talk about that and by saying something like, oh, I think I might be unintentionally favoring someone in this way, it actually opens up a meaningful dialogue that can change it as opposed to just being like, you're wrong, right? Like human beings have bias. It's an evolutionary
I
adaptation.
totally agree with you. I think that makes so much sense to just address it, not brush it under the rug, because I don't think it gets any better if you just keep brushing it under the rug or ignoring it.
Right, or pretending it's not there. And one of the things that we've found that's been really impactful is so there's this idea of culture fit, which is actually just like this intractable morass of unconscious bias that doesn't really mean anything. And so we've actually changed in our hiring and the way that we think about people is we talk about values fit. And it's not just a rebranding exercise, although that's fun. It's also that we've identified specific behaviors and qualities that make people successful at Atlassian. So if you know our values, they came from Australians, so they curse a little bit. But it's things like open company, no bullshit. We want someone who defaults to working transparently, and we'll ask them about their past behaviors where they've dealt with information and how they think about it. Play as a team is about a commitment to collaboration and going the extra mile for someone else. And so we want to see that people can demonstrate past behavior where they've done that.
You want a good example of that? Netflix publishes their culture deck. Just go to their webpage and read that. It's like 100 slides of things they want people to do, right? And it's fabulous, right? And they had the kind of guts to kind of put that out in the public. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Sometimes it really comes down to accountability because you have to get to that individual hiring manager, right? Because you could have all the best intentions and the great diversity and inclusion program, but if you have an individual that's doing the hiring and you're not touching that individual in a way, pros and cons to attaching bonuses and things like that, compensation to the actual diversity numbers. I've known companies and worked for companies that actually do that, and you can actually see a change when you attach it to the money aspect of it. I'm sorry, guys, but when you attach it to the male aspect of finance, it triggers something. And a lot of times, I get it, a lot of what I'm going to say it, get a lot of angry white men that get defensive when we start talking about diversity and inclusion because they feel victimized. They feel like, hey, everybody's always on me and, I'm the bad guy.
Because I've had it so bad. I really suffered.
Yes, you've had it so bad, right? But it's not even that. It's just understanding that if your company doesn't look like, the culture or the populace of the population, then you may have something that you need to address. And like I said, hiring manager, it's getting down to that individual person because I suspect there are a couple of jobs that I've received because I've had sponsorship from the boss's boss, and they said, you will hire her more so than them actually wanting me as that particular candidate.
So I'm going to go back to a little bit, you touched on this earlier, Aubrey, the inclusion piece, because I know the part of the retention is you need to feel like you're part of the community and part of the company, and not just your bosses, but your coworkers, okay? Their inherent biases, their discomfort with someone from a culture they're not familiar with or whatever. How do you address that? Because that seems like that's still a big problem. I've read stories of people who got a great job, but they never felt like they were part of the team. They had to assimilate. They felt awkward, then they just left and were not happy there. They couldn't be themselves there, right? So how do you address that problem?
Yeah, I think part of it is this sounds like a strange way to approach it, but actually starting to describe diversity across more than just gender and race. So one of the things that happens when we sort of put it in that box is it becomes this us versus we. People feel like they're being victimized. And so when you start talking about what does diversity mean, Atlassian, if you don't know, we're based in Sydney. So we have a ton of international diversity. And so by creating a language for people to address that and say, I'm unique and different and that's a value add, all of a sudden when someone comes in, I as a Hispanic woman come in and I'm describing my experience, which is very different than my teammates, they also are like, oh, that's not threatening. And so it's easier for them to create space for me to be my authentic self, right? And that's true of everyone. And not that white men, don't have times when they're not their authentic selves, but in many cases, those spaces have been created that allow them to do it anyway. But so when you bring them into the conversation and say, hey, you're part of diversity too, all of a sudden it doesn't become threatening. And so those folks who are already there, it's a little bit easier for them to open up so that you have the space for those folks who are coming in who identify as minority or are brand new to the space. So it's really about teaching that subtle awareness and emotional intelligence than it is like any particular action. And I also think it's just teaching people to know people as people.
Right.
Right.
And that sounds really silly, but making sure it's really basic things like making sure you don't walk into a meeting and just start hammering on your agenda items, right? Like actually care what someone did last weekend, right? Not just how are you, but like I remember that your kid is in ballet. Like how did the recital go? And just those little tiny things actually make someone feel safe enough to show up authentically.
I think that, I mean, I really struggle with this because if you look at where we're at today, there are less women graduating in science technology with science technology degrees today than there were in like the 80s, right? We start talking about this as a space, and we're going the opposite direction as a macro industry. Right? Now, every company we're talking about, hey, we're doing this, we're trying to focus on it. I think that the reality is that everyone up here, everyone out here, we still need to figure out what there's no silver bullet. It's a lot of these grassroots, creating space for people, treating them like people type of conversations that are going to help solve this. Otherwise, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're in a world of hurt by 2022. With a million jobs unopened or unfilled today, and the notion that there will be 2 million jobs by 2022, we all know, we're all here for this conference, this cybersecurity ecosystem is not getting safer, right? It's not on a nice path of we're all going to be happy. So being able to bring in diverse thought, being able to expand the talent pool, these are really, really critical things for us to do in order just to solve the overall threat. Otherwise, we're going to have a complete world of haves and have-nots from a company perspective.
Well, unless you buy Palo Alto Networks, then you are safe.
I think but there are statistics that show that millennial women are graduating more with STEM-based degrees. So I agree with you in that there was a gap, a huge gap, up until this point, women of my age, we won't tell you my age, but
20.
20? But I'm not in the millennial. You couldn't pay me to be 20 again.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a good point.
No, you couldn't. But so there is a gap, but that gap is you see by the numbers that there are more women graduating in the millennial generation with STEM-related degrees. So it becomes if you have a millennial workforce and you don't have something close to 50-50, then you're not looking because they're there, right? And
can I brag about the Girl Scout thing?
Oh yeah, please do.
How many people know about the Girl Scout thing that we did? Okay, excellent. The person behind this, the mastermind sitting over there, it's Brittany, okay? All right, she's the one to put this together, and what we decided to do is do something about this problem. So Palo Alto Networks has partnered with the Girl Scouts to develop 18 cybersecurity badges for ages K through 12. Right, and we'll start to see the first ones roll out next year, right? So here is a whole population, it's 2 million girls, right? All ages are gonna be exposed to cybersecurity throughout their entire education, right? And so that's gonna be a gigantic pipeline coming into us as soon as they start coming to work for us. So we're very proud of that, right?
And it's support though, yeah?
Yeah, it's all Brittany. Brittany came up with that.
Yeah. And it's support though, right? I have a 10-year-old daughter that is off the charts in math, but I'm vested in making her see that if this is something that she wants to pursue, I will die before I let you get out of it. There's a lot of money. And you can't stay with me after 18.
Yeah. Well, you obviously haven't seen my house. Okay.
You gotta go. No, but no, reaching back, like you said, in those younger age ranges so they can feel comfortable. I mean, I was such a geek and a nerd, and I was so introverted. At the time when I was in school, I didn't miss the I can't do it, right? It was I'm good at this. I get A's. I'm gonna keep doing it. So I didn't get and then growing up where I went to, I wouldn't have gotten it anyway because I was a geek and in inner city. But that's different. But it's making sure they're supported. And again, that visibility, making sure that, you know, you have exposure, but they're supported, right? Because they have to be okay with it. Because when we get into the junior high school years and we get into the mean girl years and, you know, that we have other issues as women that, you know, take some importance, and we have to get them there and get them excited and keep them there in order to fill that pipeline.
One thing real quick. You mentioned a little bit, you know, talking about the inclusion aspect and being in a leadership role, whether it's us, any of you in your leadership roles, it is a heavy burden. You're going to sit there and say, okay, why do I got to do this? I feel like I'm going above and beyond. It's just the way it is. And it's up to us to make the change. And so it really is, I mean, that quick comment you made about, you know, just creating space, that is tremendous. And I cannot underemphasize how important or how helpful that is to a lot of people. I tend to be the very brash, I'm going to talk over people type. And so I have to put myself in check and say, you know what do you think? Because I recognize, you look like you have something to say.
Well, I had to take that note because you said we have to be interested in what our employees did over the weekend. I have a hard time with that. So, okay, I'll try to get better.
But it's an important piece where that burden is absolutely real, and it's something that we just have to do because we have to change the space. And so I think that's a big challenge for everyone in the audience and everyone on stage that we continue to go through.
I just want to go back to a problem that we talked about actually at last year's panel that I think is still a problem because I hear about it over and over again, is a lot of the job descriptions out there require a lot of certification, a lot of experience. How do you get these folks who don't have the experience yet or may not have had the ability to get the skills, they're underrepresented communities? I know we talked a little bit on our call about even relaxing some of the certifications to get someone in and train them on the job. What are some of the things that you guys are doing or that you know they're going on that are helping people who are underprivileged in terms of having access to getting those skills or hands-on stuff in their neighborhoods or their communities?
I have one thought, and then I'll leave it to you guys. Don't believe the job description. Honestly, I mean, first of all, women, we have issues because we can be 80% qualified, but we won't apply because there's 20% that we don't have. That's our issue. Those are our issues, and those are our issues. But
I apply to jobs I'm not qualified for
all the time. I know you do.
Yeah.
No, but
You're not going to get that badge, are you, Rick? You're not going for that Girl Scout badge.
But I tell my mentees all the time, don't you dare believe that. I said, they put everything in the kitchen sink in that job description. I actually called a recruiter out on this because they wanted all these certifications and they wanted a CISSP, but they were only asking for like 3 years of experience. And I said, do you know you have to have at least 5 years of experience in order to get a CISSP? So why is this in the job description? So I'll stop there because I can go on about that.
No, I think that's a really great point. I'll disagree with you a little bit, but I think we end up at the same outcome, which is no, companies stop writing crap job ads. I mean, and I say that as someone who we've overhauled ours. And so, right, there's this research that I can tell you Atlassian hires people who are, quote, underqualified because there were 12 requirements on the ad for my job and I had 2 of them. They wanted 8 years of HR experience. I was like, how's 4 months work for you? They were like, no problem, fine, come here. So I think that's part of it is we've actually tried to refactor and instead of thinking about the requirements list as this like unicorn special candidate that like, you know, can throw sparkles and rainbows and also solve all of your cyber issues. Instead, what is the minimum floor of qualification that someone must know how to do when they walk in the door on day one? Because the fact is, in you know any technical field, that what someone needs to know 12 months from now doesn't exist right now in a lot of ways. So trying to tell someone that they have to know everything is silly, right? You should be indexing on, do they learn really quickly and know how to solve problems that they've never seen before? Like that's going to predict someone's success 1, 2, 5 years down the road, more so than whether they have a particular certification that your corporate budget can probably pay to get them through anyway. And that's helped us hire non-traditional candidates too.
Well, I agree, and I think we've made a mistake as our industry. The network defender industry has made a mistake that said we want all those certifications. Those million jobs, we were talking about this before this thing started. Those aren't all tier 3 top-end Intel analyst jobs. That they're not. They're tier 1 jobs, help desk jobs. Those are those kinds of things. And you only need like 5 classes to be helpful or be useful in a job like that, right? So you don't need a computer science education. You don't need a EE degree. You just need a basic get started. You're going to probably need that stuff later, okay? But to get into this field, you don't need it. And we're working with the University of Alabama with that very idea that they can get certified on some basic stuff and come to work as a tier 1 level. So that's where we should kind of change our mind about this.
I think that looking at aptitude is absolutely an important piece. And so looking at the aptitude of a candidate, I do think that you kind of struggle with this as you're kind of hiring. There are different traits for every generation that you're hiring, right? But there is a big onus on the organizations are not going to just create this very easy, happy path of this is your certification path and here's the amazing job description. And so there's going to be a lot of work of saying, okay, how am I going to prove that? I think that fundamentally it does boil down to, though, you don't write yourself off from that. You like get in front of that person, get in front of that hiring manager, and have that conversation, and being able to demonstrate aptitude. I will hire for aptitude 9 times out of 10 times.
Can I piggyback on something you said too, right? When I interview a lot of people, and the one question I wait for the end, the very same question for everybody is, what are you running at your house? Right? Because if you're not running a Linux box that you built by yourself, you're not smart enough to be on my team. It's not that you have to know how to do Linux. You have to be smart enough to figure out that stuff on your own, because I'm going to give you no guidance. I'm going to give you a big, hairy problem, go solve it, and that's what I need. I need those kind of people who can adapt, okay, and figure stuff out on their own. I don't need a computer science degree.
So you guys have come across this before, I'm sure. There are skeptics out there on the diversity topic for hiring. One of the questions that was posed to me by some hiring folks and some comments I've heard is, how do you justify hiring a diverse candidate who's less experienced than a non-diverse candidate who has more experience? How do you address that question?
It's great. I answer this question all the time. So the answer is first, I think that the variant of that question that I hear most often is like, what if you have 2 completely identical candidates except for that? And like, if anyone's worked in recruiting, like that's never happened. So it's a great theoretical argument, but it's not practical. But I think it really depends on what you're optimizing for, to be honest. So the empirical research tells us that when we're around people who are different from us, and we can see that, our brains actually process information in a better way. And so if you're trying to pick the best candidate for a single role, well, it turns out that most work in the future, and even now, isn't happening by individuals, it's happening by teams and groups. And so, yes, maybe it's that you have 1 year less of experience, but you're bringing in a diverse set of life experiences and perspectives such that you are not just great for that role, but you are also actually going to magnify the impact of the team. You're increasing the innovative potential, you're increasing the efficiency of their information processing. And so if you're actually optimizing for the team, which is where work really gets done, it's a pretty easy business decision.
Yeah, and I think, and I've said this before, is that if men could have solved the cybersecurity problem, it would have been solved already, right? So,
I think we said that we solved that with Palo Alto. No, I'm just kidding.
But I mean, I've built teams before, so I need a lot of different people, right? I'm as a leader. I need introverts, I need extroverts. I need the guy that's sitting behind the computer that's all he wants to do all day, every day. He doesn't want to touch anybody, he doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's there. No. I need that guy, but I also need my extrovert, the one that thinks creatively. So as a leader, I need different kind of people. So when you start, I need millennials, I need, people in mid-career, I mean later career people, and you actually have to look at your team. And if you have all cookie cutter people thinking and doing the same thing, you're not doing yourself a service. So it's like you ask the theoretical question about underrepresented, they're not as qualified as the next person. However, if you're still solving for the same problems, maybe you need some infusion of different thought process, different thinking, whether it's men, women, you need introverts, you need extroverts, you need Hispanic, you need Black, you need Indian. I mean, if you get different people that have different experiences, they're able to come in and add value, and they see a problem in the bigger way, and the solving of that problem in a different way.
I have a great example of that. I was having dinner with the lady in charge of doing news segments on ESPN. Now, how do you present sports information so that people can consume it? Her team had nobody on there that understood sports. Okay, it was literature majors, it was Russian literature, and there were some science guys, there were some tech guys, but they had nothing to do with sports. And they're the ones that came up with the yellow line across the football field. Okay, that we all see. It wasn't a sports guy that did that, right? So it just goes to your point.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a notion of where hiring managers, oftentimes, and all of us have hired or will hire people, we think that we're hiring for a role, and we're not, right? When I hire a team. When I look at my direct reports, the first gap I look at is, what's the biggest thing I'm weakest at? What's my biggest weakness, right? And then I hire that super detailed, analytical person who's going to be a nightmare and ask me all the questions I don't want to ask, because I know that that's a gap on the team, right? And so I think even when you look at job descriptions and roles, the way it actually works is we say, hey, we have this new role. Okay, great. Just grab the copy of the last role description, throw that over into the new one, and then put that out. As a hiring manager, it's really up to us to say, okay, we have a new role. Okay, what's the role in the team? Great, they need to be a cloud expert, or they need to do X, Y, or Z. There's some technical chops here, but what's the actual dynamic of the team that we need to sort? Just like Mary said, it's an introvert, it's an extrovert. We need somebody who can be an advocate. We need somebody who can do this. We need somebody, I have a great team of engineers, but nobody can do PowerPoint. All right, let's think through that, right? And so when you do that, you actually don't look at just the years of experience. You look at the candidate and say, you know what, I think that you would actually be a better fit because you have this aspect of grit, or you have this aspect of that. So I think that's a big factor to look at.
So I wanted you guys to also just, we've touched on this, but kind of more in sort of more detail, more sort of harder answer. For the companies that are skeptical about the diversity hiring concept, what would you tell them? What are the real advantages of this? I mean, we talked about all these things we just touched on, but I mean, if you want to tell them, this is why you need to do this. If you're in an elevator, you need to pitch it to them, what would you tell them?
I'll start, because from a practical standpoint, from a security vendor, we've already talked about the mean employee gap that we all have, right? If we have any hope to fill that gap, it has to have minorities and women in it, okay? So just as a practical matter, okay, that's the reason you want to go for that kind of a hire.
Yeah, I was going to say, everyone talks about the talent shortage, and it's like, well, there's, a huge chunk of the world that's not actually even being tapped, right? I think the other thing is that, especially issues within security and within privacy, I look at privacy example for women, right? Women are much more likely to be stalked and harassed in sort of digital spaces and things like that. So if you're talking about how to prevent those types of things or thinking about all of that, there are people who are deeply impacted by those problems who are not being asked to solve them when they're actually the SMEs. And so it's not that, right, men have a different relationship with a lot of those things in digital spaces. And it's not that their contributions aren't important, but they're not complete. And so how do you think you can solve half a problem, especially one that keeps running 50 yards ahead of you? And so you become better at your job by surrounding yourself with people who fill the gaps in your knowledge as a leader, right, as a peer, and then also, frankly, just as someone who needs to fill seats and, execute on your business plan.
I'll say confirmation and consensus bias have led to some really catastrophic decisions in organizations just across the board. You can look at many, many companies and just say, you know what, it's because everybody in the same room had they went to the same school, they had the same school of thought, they went the same program, and of course they land on the same answer. So I think that when you look at diversity and inclusion, the gender and racial aspect becomes a very visible manifestation of it, but really diversity is, in my mind, diversity of thought, so that you break those notions of confirmation and consensus bias. Because the problems that we're solving 10 years from now, 5 years from now, we have no clue what they are. And there's no way that we can actually hope to tackle them by this massive, ball of confirmation and consensus bias. I mean, when you walk into a room and everyone's like, yes, that's a brilliant idea, we need somebody in there who says, yeah, I actually disagree. Here's why, right? In my leadership team, we actually assign somebody, and I do this every week, and we run, massive amounts of money, 22% of all US dollar flow. We actually assign somebody just to play devil's advocate, right? They're a senior leader. This might be something they really think of, that they really believe in, but we need them to challenge the heck out of it. And I think that when you actually start to have diversity as part of the team DNA, that becomes much more natural.
You know, I think I'd take probably a little bit more confrontational role and say, look at the mirror, look in the news, look at Uber, right? So there's something to this. And if you have blinders on and you don't see the value in it, then there may be an unconscious bias that you have as an individual, right? So it's turning that light on yourself. I would be shocked if I heard someone that, to say to you that they didn't believe in diversity and inclusion or it didn't work. And, it's just one of those things that you can't really, in today's, and especially in today's, political environment, you can't look and say that we don't have problems. And so if we have problems at a macro level, then they exist at the micro level, and to be able to say, okay, well, I'm gonna have the courage to say, even if I don't even believe in it, I'm gonna follow it. And it's just the right thing to do. It sounds corny, but if you want to get anywhere in life, the statistics, you can quote statistics. Statistics show that more diverse companies perform better.
I was just going to ask about the data. There was a study, we talked about it, and I can't think of what study it was that showed that. Do you guys remember that?
I think it was a GitHub study.
Yeah.
Where they actually, if I remember correctly, they anonymized the code bases and effectively said, okay, based on, it's just a pure code. Don't actually know who contributed versus what. And code developed by women was selected 70% of the time. Versus when it actually had the males' names attached to it, it was the complete opposite way. Right? It only translated when it was anonymized.
Yeah, and again, the study that showed that it's a financial benefit for companies to have diversity, because I think I want to say 20% is sticking in my mind, but I don't quote me on that.
The data either.
But it was a significant amount of financial performance that a company actually received when they had more diverse teams.
Interesting.
Yeah, so McKinsey put out a study that showed that gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to be in the top quintile of financial performance. And for firms that are ethnically diverse, that's 35% more likely. But there's also been studies that show that higher diversity is not only, so companies, for example, with more women on the board actually are more successful in M&A. You also see in diverse environments that there's greater retention, greater emotional commitment to colleagues, greater employee happiness, right? So lots of things you're like, those are great for my business. Yeah. But it turns out that diversity is sort of a driver of that. So which means that we often talk about how diversity benefits those of us who come from underrepresented groups, but the fact is that the benefit is actually for everyone. And I think that's really important because it can get over some of the sort of victimization feelings, which are real, that you talked about earlier. And the way I say is they are real, but they are not necessarily true. But also making sure that you paint the picture. That you're saying, I'm doing this for you too, because I believe that you will benefit, that is absolutely not to your detriment that I am doing this.
Mary said something that was really interesting, right? And it sounded almost like you were apologizing for saying it, but it's the right thing to do. That's a really important statement. I have a daughter. I was raised by a single mother. Like, there's a big part of me. Part of the reason why I'm helping to drive diversity in women in technology for the investment bank is because it is the right thing to do, right? We can talk about the numbers, financial performance, right? But fundamentally, I want my daughter to have every single opportunity. And I'm the big aggressive dad, so if someone says she's not going to get the job because she's a woman, I'll probably go after her. Right? But like I do, I want her to be able to say, you know what, she wants to be a developer, then sure, right? And I'm going to teach her everything I can to promote that. But it's fundamentally the right thing to do. And I think that is a burden that we all have to look at.
And I think that actually speaks to something that you said earlier, where you're saying there's more millennials coming in, and what we actually see with the millennial generation in consumers and how they're engaging with business is they're not just thinking about what is the actual utilitarian value of what you're providing me, but what are the values of the brand that I'm supporting, right? So we see this, we see campaigns and we see hashtags against companies that that people think aren't just doing the right thing, full stop. And so it actually becomes a valuable brand attribute, both in terms of business acquisition, but also it becomes part of your employer brand, right? And we know that millennials, I think it's 2052, the US will be a majority minority nation. And so you're not building a long-term company if you're not investing in these things before those changes happen.
That's a good point. So before we go to the audience questions, I wanted you each to give one thing you would tell an organization that wanted to work on their diversity problem. They wanted to do something. What would be the one thing you would tell them to do? If we give them like 4 things. So if you each could give me one, that would be awesome.
Well, you can put
Let Mary go first.
I knew you were going to.
I can go to Anthony
Yeah,
first.
go to Anthony.
Anthony, go first. Anthony, now you're on the spot. You don't have to, you just give one. We're going to have 4, hopefully.
I think it does go back to the pipeline piece. And it's not just what the organization is doing for their community, how they're engaging with, whether it's the Girl Scouts or colleges. I think that the company needs to be absolutely looking at the pipeline of how they're growing their internal talent and recognizing that, creating that space. We don't do enough of it. We don't focus on who's promoting. So I think you have to look at the pipeline piece in a big way.
I would say run a survey. Like, do you actually know where you are right now? It's really hard to move forward if you don't. And what I've seen is that when folks tend to run those surveys, and Culture Amp, if you don't know them, they're great. They have a free inclusion survey. It won't cost you anything. But go look and cut that by demographics, and look and see whether the minorities' perceptions of their work environments are the same as their majority group counterparts. And start there by fixing the little pain points. Because one of the things that I found was we had a lot of us said, I don't know where to get the resources to get my job done. I was like, no, we just need to add a module in onboarding about how to use Confluence, right? And that doesn't sound like an inclusion question, but it was, and it had impact. So there's lots of little free things that you can do, but you first have to know where you're starting.
I would say talk to the men, okay? Contrary to popular belief, not all of us are male chauvinist pigs, right? Some of us just don't know that we should be doing things about this, right? We should provide them the tools to speak up and say, you are not allowed to have that sexual discussion in front of this crowd. You're not allowed to push that female employee down. You're not allowed to do those kinds of things in this organization, and give them the power to do that.
Yeah, I would say look at your retention numbers, right? Because your retention numbers give you a clue into inclusion. Because diversity is just bringing a whole bunch of people together. Inclusion is, again, making them feel that they can be successful. And so if you hire a whole bunch of minorities and women, and then within 2 years they're gone, you have a problem. So start tracking those numbers, and that could give you an idea on whether you have an inclusion issue.
Just to back up one more time, I know we talked about this earlier, but again, for your existing employees, to get them to embrace this culture, is there any advice you have for that?
To get them to embrace it is the best way I would say is peer accountability, right? Because it can come from the top, but if you can say this off-color joke and it's just a whole bunch of guys in the room and not one guy stand up, even though there's not a diverse person in the room, if the guy doesn't call the other guy out, that's going to be a problem. Yep. So actually having the freedom to call BS when you see BS and say, no, I will not tolerate, you speak it, and that goes against our company culture.
That's a good one. I like that. Any other suggestions? That's a really good one.
What she said.
What she said.
Yeah.
Not fair.
I'm also a big fan, reward people when they do the right thing, right? So when you act, in a way that affirms the culture, give people tangible professional awards for it, right? If someone is spot on with their skills and they're doing something to advocate for that, be like, I'm giving you this project and I want everyone to know it's because I think they lead inclusively, and that's important. And that's why they're getting this really awesome assignment, right? That's really consequential when people go, oh, I can't progress in my career if I don't get on track with it. Because that's what creates meaningful change, right? Is they start doing it and they're like, oh, I feel good and it's fun. I'm gonna keep doing it, right? But give someone a reward when they do the right thing, because they'll be incentivized to do it more, and then they'll start advocating for their friends, their colleagues, their peers.
We've actually gone through, and there's multiple times I sat down with my leadership team, and there are some key projects, and I'll just use this as an example, where I said, okay, why is Mike doing that versus Victoria? Well, Victoria could do it, I guess. Okay, why don't we have Victoria do it? Oh, sure. It's just that much, and it creates that much of an exposure, and it's a completely different dynamic where it was just a quick conversation of just challenging your team, challenging your organization, of saying, hey, you know what? Why can't we have so and so do that versus that? Oh, well, I just always use Mike. Okay, well, why don't we use Victoria for this one, right? And I think that the more we do that, it doesn't shift the body of work. We maintain the same level of expectations, right? We have the same high caliber of performance that we're expecting, but it creates a different platform because now every junior below Victoria can look up and be like, wow, she's running that project. You know, I kind of look like her.
I got an example of that. I promoted my executive assistant to chief of staff because she was just running the show anyway, right? And I got a.
Normally they do.
I know, but it was even more than normal, right? So, and I got a call from our HR rep that says all the other EAs are mad that you promoted to chief of staff because they're not chief of staff. And I said, well, they should go talk to their bosses about that job, all right? So it kind of creates that conversation going, right?
Conversations aren't bad. For whatever reason, we're afraid to have them.
Right.
So I think let's have the conversation. And the worst thing, somebody's going to walk away educated, right? And I think that's a really important piece.
Great. Well, I want to open this up to the audience. If you guys could step up to the microphone, the panel's here to answer your questions. And then when we're finished with that, we're going to have a little networking reception in the back, so we hope you'll stay with us for that as well. So just step on up, and hopefully the mic is on.
I have a question for Anthony. As JPMC, you have a large budget to do all this mentorship, bring people in, broaden your pipeline. Is there any effort to funnel your mentees down to your suppliers who may not have that budget? You know, companies like mine that are 50 people have one recruiter and can't get that diversity.
Yeah, there's actually, so thanks for the question. So yes, we do have a lot of aspects where we're trying to focus on our stuff internally. So that's just a natural course, I think, of every company today. There's actually a number of other organizations where we're talking with to say, okay, is there something that we can do to fix the broader ecosystem? I've personally had some conversations with IBM and a number of other organizations where it's like, how do we fix the broader ecosystem that we can then matriculate to supplier organizations, et cetera? It's a tough nut to crack, and this is why I think it's so fundamental for us to solve it. Because again, if we don't, then in 5 years timeline, we really do get into a world of have and have-nots. Large organizations that can hire the best minds to do these things, and then nonprofit organizations, small organizations that can't find a cybersecurity person, they're dealing with ransomware every week, right? So it's up to us to make sure that we rise the tide. But so those are things we're absolutely thinking of.
So, I have a comment and a question. I am with the ICMCP. God,
I'm gonna need you to learn how to say that.
Right? Especially since I'm director of corporate events. And I've had some of you on events that we've had. We've had events around the U.S., right? Here we are at Black Hat, thousands of people here at Black Hat, and I can look around this room and see faces that I've seen before. I'm saying that to say, it all sounds good, right? What you're proposing, we say to companies, what you're proposing, we do. But we need to do something else too, because when we go to these diversity events, when we talk about diversity, it's the same people talking about diversity. And so in your minds, right, what really do we need to do to get more people openly having the conversation about diversity? We talked about people don't want to talk, right? And no matter who sponsors the event or where we go, we see the same faces, right? We got to change that. So my question to you guys is, what are you doing to change that? Do you recognize it needs to be changed, right? And then what can we collectively as a group do to change that? So we start seeing faces we don't know, right? Because that lets us know, hey, people are getting the message.
I have two answers for you. One, CEOs. Two, safe spaces, which is everyone's favorite word. So first, CEOs, leadership matters. So did Lassie, and one of the things that was really crucial to me when I joined, because I'm difficult, is I had to know that we have 2 CEOs, which is also weird, but I had to know that they were on board. Like, I'm never going to discuss why I'm here. I have no time to justify my existence. And it's not that they show up behind the scenes, right? Like when I'm like, oh, I need this thing moved. It's things like our user summit. I don't make executive requests of their time for the diversity program. They know they're showing up. It's never, why do you need me there? It's, what do you need me to do and how do you need my help? And so I think that's a big part, is leaders stepping up and saying, I care about this. I look like you and you better follow me. The other thing that I think is really crucially important is that inclusion is really hard and complicated. Like, it's really simple on one side, but it's also terrifying on the other side. And especially now, we're in a space, right? We're in a very polarized political environment where there are people who use the wrong word because of their life experience. They do not know it's not okay. And they are pilloried on the internet for it for the rest of their existence. And that is not an incentive structure that causes people to try. So one of the things that I do is I try really hard, and I can tell you based on the secret hip chats that I get at work, people do trust that I will not yell at them if they ask me stupid questions. It's a weird example, but it happened last week. So like someone emailed me and was like, I'm really sorry. Is it okay if I ask you what the word pansexual means? And like they just had never heard it, right? It's an LGBT word, definition's not important, but it was like the person needed to know, and they literally had nowhere else to go to ask that question. Or, you know, I come from a super rural place in Michigan. And so it's like, I had never eaten Asian food before I went to college, right? Like it just happened. And so creating spaces for people to learn and to ask the hard questions is really crucial, because there's a lot of people who want to do the right thing, who want to be awesome male allies or want to do that, but they are so terrified of doing the wrong thing that they never try to learn how to do the right thing. And so I think it's for those of us in the room, letting people mess up a little bit. And it's not judging you by your mistakes, but judging you by the fact that you don't repeat them because we've helped you learn. And I don't think that we've necessarily, in the same way, created that space that we need to. And that both spaces need to exist, right? Because we're all learning, right? I'm the head of inclusion, and I do exclusive stuff sometimes. Like I'll get a ping like, you can't say that. I'm like, whoa, thank you. Right? Right? It's cool. I didn't know that was a problem. Like we have arguments over different nomenclatures of English and things like that. So.
So I think that it's really on a lot of large organizations, just to kind of take it back. Give you an example. I look at a lot of technology. For a lot of suppliers, especially when they're building up new vendor, solution provider, whatever it is, they get a chance to pitch out to the CISO of the investment bank at JP Morgan. It's an interesting conversation that they take with earnest. And if they come to me with a team of all men, I ask the question, what kind of female on the team? And that changes the entire nature of the conversation. I think as large organizations factor that in, we did a number of big reviews for some bids of work, and I factor in that the presentation teams were not diverse at all. And I think that when CEOs and organizations recognize that, hey, other companies care about this too, it starts to change the dynamic. It's a tough problem to solve, though.
I'll give you a specific thing to do for this conference, right? How many people at this conference? 20,000, most of them are men, okay? Go ask, most of the men in this room, go ask your colleagues, why didn't they come to this panel, right? And ask them why, right? Because this is a problem, this is for the industry, right? Why aren't you interested in this? Even if they have a good reason not to come, you should have that conversation with them, right?
Yeah, you asked me personally, no, you asked the group personally, what were they doing? So recently accepted the vice president role with ICMCP.
You will not be getting promoted.
No, she won't. So that's one of the things that I personally felt that was very, very, very important in having the conversations. Again, you know, I speak on diverse panels. I also go to non-related diversity, panels, right? I am a technologist. I do know a little bit about information security, but just being there in a technical talk, so to speak, provides an opportunity for people to visually change what they may think about, who this particular race or gender, what they're all about, right? So I purposely set goals for myself to attend things that, are not necessarily related to diversity and cybersecurity, but actually, the all male, when you're sitting in the room and you're the only Black person and female in the room, and it be there and then be visible, right? And so that actually changes or gives an attitude or a change of conversation about what this is all about, especially when you're able to speak intelligently about your field. Right.
I agree with all the things you guys said. I'll just maybe take a little bit of dispute. I think talking about it's really important. That's what I think we're trying to do here. We kind of evolved this panel the last 3 years. It was about women in security first, and we realized this is not just women, it's diversity. So we just sort of evolved it. And I think the more we talk about these things and bring these things to light, I think the better. It's going to take time. It's hard to change people's cultural perceptions, inherent bias. We've all seen that. But I think this is a start. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to get the conversation out there, and I've been writing about this stuff, and this is stuff that's really important to me as well. So I think the more we talk about it, that's better. Changing people's minds is not easy, right? Not always getting people interested, but I think the more you bring it up, like you said, the more you're sitting in front of people, you're telling them your experience, getting them to think of things through your eyes and walk in your shoes. I think that kind of starts a conversation at least. It doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately, but hopefully it's a start. If you have any suggestions afterwards, I want to hear them though too. All right, next up.
Thank you. About 2 years ago, I made the career change to go into cybersecurity, and I did that through education. And Mary Angela into ICMCP. I'm one of the recipients of being here by virtue of the scholarship that you partnered with Black Hat, so I'm very grateful for that because of what I've been able to partake and see and take in. The challenge that I'm finding, one, is getting that first entry-level position. You both alluded to how some of these job descriptions are written, entry-level position, but they want you to have 1 to 2 years of experience. And I thought entry-level position meant that you don't have experience. That's why it's an entry-level position. I don't get that. But up until I get to that point where I'm working, and even further along in my career where I'm actually managing a team, what do I do now these few years as I'm navigating my own personal challenge to get into the field, to have an awareness of being able to have some impact in the hiring of women and people of color and people of other ethnicities that are not represented in cybersecurity now?
Never stop giving back. I think that, from my perspective, push up to pull up. I'm looking for people that can take my job, right? So as you go on and as you gain that experience, you know how hard it's been. So it's your job personally to touch as many people as you can to assist them with the knowledge that you've learned and how you navigate it. That's how I feel about it, and that's how I live, my life. I want to scream at the top of my lungs and, just this is what you need to do, because I'm not going through all of this pain for no reason at all. Right? I'm not having all of these issues, and someone else can learn from my experiences and just having that touch points. Be a mentor. I've been a mentor since I was in college. So there's no age range. There's no, certain level of professional experience you need. You just need, because believe it or not, it provides you with a level of peace about what you're trying to get accomplished when you're actually able to help someone else.
I also think ask a lot of questions. So I fundamentally believe that most people already know how to solve their own problems. You just have to ask them the right questions. And so one of the things that's worked at Atlassian is, when we're sitting down with the hiring manager and they're saying, well, I need this, 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 and this. You say, well, why do you need that? Why are we recruiting from this particular talent pool instead of all of these other ones, right? And people go, oh, well, I don't know. That's just what I've done, always. And so just being I mean, it's the Socratic method, right? But rather than direct people, say, well, why? What's the justification? Because a lot of times the things that cause exclusion or underrepresentation aren't intentional. It's because someone's running really fast in this direction and not thinking about all the other things. And so you can bring a lot of awareness to people just by asking why, right? Trying to gain understanding yourself can create great understanding of your team, which starts to build the intention and the incentive to start changing, right? I think you probably also, I use my personal experience, I tell my story a lot to talk about it, right? Because like, who in their right mind hires a 26-year-old like PhD dropout to run like a global HR function, right? Like, seriously, who accidentally hit the okay on the job offer for that? I do know her name, but right, like I am someone who is manifestly not quote qualified for the job that someone gave me, and a lot of times those are the most interesting candidates, right? So telling your story is enormously powerful.
I think qualification is it's somewhat relative. I met a 13-year-old kid that I would have hired. We were doing a talk, and I was giving this big presentation, and I had this 13-year-old kid just messing with his phone or something. And afterwards, they came up to me. They're like, "Oh, sorry, he's actually compiling 4 programs. He writes in 7 different languages, right?" And then I had the most amazing conversation with this 13-year-old kid about the future of cybersecurity, and it was just fascinating. And the inverse is I do meet a lot of people where I'm like, "Hey, we're talking about this entry-level role," and they're like, "Hey, I'm interested in getting in the cloud." I'm like, "Okay, great. Have you ever stood anything up?" And they've actually never opened up an Amazon console, right? They've never actually instantiated an instance, or they've never actually done anything from that factor, right? There is one thing to say I'm interested and I don't have experience, but there are a lot of kids who actually have their own Linux distributions, they're compiling their own code, they're doing all these things, and it's not like Google isn't accessible to everybody. So I think that's one of the most fundamental aspects. And so and I would say this, and I say this all the time, right? If someone is ready to have an entry-level conversation, they've done some of the fundamental pieces, I'm absolutely willing to take a conversation at any point. So feel free to reach out to me after this, and I'll chat with you.
I have specific advice for you, right? Be the best at your job, right? Put yourself in a position where you're the go-to person for whatever it is you're doing. Be the leader in the organization, so when you have a chance to make a decision about a diversity hire, you can make that decision, right? Don't rely on other people to get that done.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you guys for doing this panel. It's really, really great to hear this conversation more and more. I've heard a lot from all of you about the company's role, the company's responsibility to be inclusive and have the diversity conversation, but I haven't yet heard when is it our turn? When is it our responsibility to be open to those conversations and getting into those challenging and most of the time uncomfortable conversations? When does it start being the candidate or the employee's role to say, hey, what you did wasn't right or it was offensive, now we should have a conversation about how to fix it and how to move forward and how not to alienate people?
I think it's all the time, right? I think when we were talking about inclusion, when we made the comment, when I made the comment about, peers holding each other accountable for the words that are said when there's no one else around, right? And it's always your job because you are the company. You are, as a representative of the company, you are the one that's creating the culture. Everybody's responsible. So, having those conversations, it was a funny thing that happened this past election cycle at the company I was working for at the time. People were actually talking about stuff that were taboo. It was taboo just 4 years ago, right? So I think we have a unique opportunity right now, to have these conversations. And it's a daily thing. It's like, hey, and I call it when you see it, call a spade when you see it. It's now.
So I've been calling on the men to do stuff. This is where the women could jump in here, right? Because you are afraid to do that in many cases. And all right, and
not me.
I'm sorry. Present company.
It's been FBI issues.
Please come tell me when I step out of bounds because I'm a dumb old white guy. All right, someone should tell me if I make a mistake like that. So, please.
Yeah, I think leaders, right? As a leader, it's like you should be like, please tell me when I mess up. But that also puts it on you. Like if I messed up and offended you, you don't get to be mad if you haven't told me about it, right? If I do it the first time, it's my fault. If I do it the second time, it's on you because you didn't tell me I did it wrong, right? But it's up to me to create the environment where someone feels safe to do that. I think the other thing that I say as someone, I'm like a hat trick minority. So like for me, after the shooting in Orlando, right? Like I was like not okay on any level, right? It's like my people, like were shooting in American history, and everyone like was like looking at me like, what are you gonna do? And I actually showed up and I was like, actually y'all, I need to cry at my desk and I'm not okay today. And it was like my teammates literally didn't know that they needed to like give me a hug, except that I was like, I'm just a pile of mess today. So I think there's something about showing up vulnerably and authentically with your story and your experience when it's awesome and like your kid crushed it at their ballet recital, or when you're having pain, because it starts those real discussions that even if you don't get to an agreement point, you get to an understanding point with it. And I think that's in my experience working in D&I and having a particular life experience based on what I look like and also my ethnicity, there's so many people who want to do the right thing, but their life experience has denied them the understanding of what it feels like to be a minority. And so it's really hard to expect them to change when they don't have any light about what that feels like and what that life experience is. And we have an obligation, I think, to bring that to them in an empathetic way.
I think it's up to you. It's up to everybody, right? You as an individual. And if the reason why we don't talk about it, why nobody actually says something, is because they're scared. There's something, and if you're scared, then you're not in an environment with a leadership team or organization you feel that you can trust. I think that you have to have that conversation. You have to break through that aspect of fear, and then it's up to us. It's a burden, right? Nobody likes to be that person of confrontation, but it is some part of the burden of what we have to do to change the dynamic. So I think it is up to the individuals.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is it's a lot easier to do that if you focus on behaviors instead of who the person is. So it's really scary if you're like, I think that you're like a racist person or a sexist person. Whereas if you approach someone and say, hey, I think you're really great and your intentions are awesome, but your action actually caused an impact you didn't intend, and I wanted to help you with that. Suddenly it becomes an affirming conversation and a point for learning, as opposed to an attack that someone's gonna get defensive. It works on a neuroscience level, but like we probably all intuitively are like, yeah, that's great, right? So that can be really powerful.
Right on, thank you.
I'm just taking more questions. I mainly just have a comment because I love the comment you had, and I appreciate that this panel's here, because just in January, I was at a SANS conference, and the hotel basically blocked off the women's bathroom for 2 men's bathrooms. That's in 2017. Okay.
Say SANS?
Yes. But
I know some people at SANS. I don't have to talk to them.
What they do? Tell me again.
They blocked
hotel.
them.
So we're having a conference. There's 30 women at this conference. There's probably 15 different groups, technical groupings, whatever, and I was in the forensics one. Coming out of the bathroom in the afternoon, they had switched it to a men's bathroom instead of a women's bathroom. So we had to walk, halfway down the hotel just to go to the restroom. That's 2017. So
Did you say something?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
They switched it within 20 minutes because
Okay.
a bunch of us.
All right, I just
I mean, the main point of my comment is that diverse panels help. I mean, because I'm glad I saw this was here, so I immediately was like, okay, at 3 o'clock, I got to be here to attend this. But we all have to help each other out. I think that's the main point that we all have to remember. Women have to help each other out. Men have to help women. Women have to help men. Minorities, LGBT, we all have to work together. And I think sometimes that gets lost. So, but thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I also want to thank each one of you up there for all that you've contributed. I'm one of the new faces here, so. Yeah, so we all wear different hats, right? And I wear a few. I'm a dad of 3 daughters, and I have a son, and I want them to have every opportunity that he has, and I'm on fire for that, right? And also, I work for a Fortune 10 company, and we're really, really committed to diversity and inclusion. I can see it doesn't happen by accident. In fact, I got hired, and I didn't fit the role. And I said, look at me. And I'm like, why did you hire me? I said to my boss, and she said, diversity of thought. And it was in the 1990s. I had a high school diploma, and I got hired into Bell Labs. And I'm like, I never heard the word diversity. What are you talking about? She said, you think differently. We need people that think differently. So my main comment and point and question is, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times, right? we can all of us have like really depressing stats or things that we can talk about, all of us, right? And at the same time, each one of you is given something that's really encouraging and really uplifting, with the Girl Scouts or with all these different things that are going on. And so I'm a master's degree student, and I'm trying to create a guide that's uplifting, that talks about all these things that are happening, because from where I sit, there's a million programs. I mean, every company, they're stupid if they don't, if they have the funds and they don't do it, right? If different than a small business, but there's plenty of opportunities, and we need to connect the people. And I'll just give you one example: 3 million women have left the workforce to have children, and they want to come back. Okay, there's 1 million empty jobs, 3 million women. We only need 1 out of 3. And that's oversimplifying it, right? Way oversimplifying it. But my point is to each of you, I'll give you a card if you'll help me contribute to make this guide that'll be uplifting. And if there's anybody in here that wants to talk, I'm a recruiter at a Fortune 500 company, and we hire diverse candidates. So if you need, I'm really an introvert, but if you're interested in talking, kind of like you offered, I'm happy to talk to you, not for my gain, but to do the right thing.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is this thing on? All right. Okay. My name is Eric Chapman. I've met a few of you before, Mary and Rick Howard, and everyone else. I just want to say thank you very much. So let's talk about leadership. I want to take this conversation towards this path. Leadership amongst minorities, especially in those senior executive roles, are abysmal. The percentage, I believe the study that I read was in 2017, the percentage of minorities in senior executive positions is around 3.5% total. For me, I am looking to become a CISO later down the line. I've been in cybersecurity for a few years. I've been in IT for 10. What would you say to those minorities that are looking to elevate the ranks of leadership? It's one thing to get in the field, and that's already a jump in itself. But how do you elevate yourself into leadership to become a prominent individual to encourage more diversity? Because I think as a African American, to see someone in leadership, to say, hey, this person made it through the ranks to be in that position, is extremely powerful, because you can tell your story and then you can encourage dozens and hundreds of people to do the same thing that you're doing. So how do you encourage those that are currently within cybersecurity to elevate within leadership?
I would say look for not a subject mentor, but a career mentor. So recognize that no one has gotten into senior leadership without someone teaching them how to navigate their career, which is a different thing than knowing your subject area. The thing is that for folks who identify as white men, they tend to get that informally. There's research that shows basically that we accidentally spend more informal time at work with people who resemble us demographically. And so and I've done this, literally, I am ambitious, I want to run a function, I need someone to help me figure out how to do that, help. And you know what, I've never been told no, I've been told I'm not the right person, but let me figure out who is. And so part of it is putting your hand up, but then if you're in a place where people are saying, no, we're not going to give that to you, recognize your value and go somewhere where they are going to give it to you, because it's lucky for that organization they get someone with that level of ambition, and they will invest in the person if they see the brilliance and the potential, and that's where you should be, because that's where you're going to grow and shine.
Absolutely.
There are challenges, specifically speaking as an African American. 3.5%, that sounds about right. There are challenges that, from a cultural perspective and a navigation perspective, it goes back to Anthony's point about sponsorship. Even very highly and well qualified individuals are being missed out on some of that CISO pinnacle, right? And I think we said there was one right? In the Fortune 100, one African American.
I don't know. There's very few of us.
I know one female, one black female. She works for Xerox in the Fortune. I think that's 100. But very, very few of us out there, and to try to crack that code, it's taking in a lot of information from a lot of different people and taking advice from a lot of different people, personal development and leadership, you know, and there's always these check boxes that you may or may not know about that exist. And, you know, it's just a matter of getting someone that's actually vested in you as an individual and your success as a sponsorship opportunity to help you navigate that. But again, I agree, if you're in a situation where you're with a company and you see there's no opportunity, you know, sometimes the best way you can answer a question is to walk out the door.
So I have some practical advice, right? I agree with you that the white guys have been in charge of security for a long time. We haven't solved it yet, right? So find the thing that we're not good at and become really, really good at that, right? And the one I would point you to is get very good at conveying technical risk to business risk. Yep. Most of us have no idea how to do that. It's reason that CISOs are kind of second tier executives, right? If you want to be a top tier executive, know how to talk business to the executives.
Absolutely.
I would say finding a mentor sponsor is going to be one of the most key pieces, right? They have to know what they're getting out of it, though, and this is it's the reality. And what I get out of it is I actually know that whoever I'm helping to sponsor or mentor, they're growing other people, and so oftentimes ambitious people of any diverse background, any non-diverse background, they're focused on themselves. That doesn't get promoted. What gets promoted and what other people help to grow is you're going to make this better because you're growing other people, you're building leadership teams. And so find a mentor that's going to help you do that. And the more you do that, I think that it absolutely translates.
Thank you.
Hi, I guess I'm a new face because I haven't been to Black Hat in 10 years.
Come back.
That was my last one when I was pregnant with my oldest. And I'm excited that we have a conversation about diversity because that was not the case 10 years ago. And I am a little bit surprised to not hear anything about the work outside of work, which impacts women disproportionately. My oldest son has the whole alphabet soup of diagnosis, so I'm really active in the community of parents of kids with special needs. And after going to meetings of dyslexia, Decoding Dyslexia Virginia for a year, the only men to enter the room were children of active members, a husband of an active member, and a man selling us on his business. Women are the ones who are doing all of this work outside of work. And we have, you know, our careers. I've been in technology and since my dad brought home an Apple IIe when I was 8 years old. And I went into computer security straight out of college when no one was interested in my EE degree and they wanted to talk about computer security. So I've been in this career for a long time. And now I'm at that point where it is not the number one priority. If you're going to say, what am I doing at 8 o'clock in the evening? I'm not thinking about work. But what does that do to us when you're talking about women in senior positions? When you've taken a woman, maybe not completely out of the workforce, but definitely priorities shift.
Right.
What do you say to that?
So I think that the notion of, you know, primary gender roles, secondary gender roles, whatever that is, I think that is continuing to shift dynamically. You see, you know, men being primary caretakers or women or whatnot. What I think organizations need to look at is the overall notion of flexible work arrangements and how they kind of think about that. It's something that organizations and companies I think are continuing to grapple with. How much you let somebody work from home versus not, how they're thinking about it. I don't think there's a one easy solution for it. It's a tough problem. It's something we're actively talking about because people feel, hey, if I'm not at the office, then I'm not going to get the visibility, then I'm not going to get the promotion, and then I'm not going to do X, Y, or Z. And managers have to let them know that, listen, it's about the work output. It's not, you know, the fact that you're sitting in your seat type of discussion. It's a super tough problem.
Yeah, I think there's a perks and benefits part of it, which is, again, back office HR, not that exciting, but things like at Atlassian, we have flexible work by default. If people want to go part-time or want to, offboard or onboard after mat leave, they do that. We also have, emergency backup childcare. So all of our employees, if they have an emergency, we have a service that they can call that we cover. So they can take their child to a center or to their house. But the other piece of the puzzle is sort of starting to cut against those gender roles or to sort of reduce the social penalties for women who cannot be on their email at 8 p.m. And that really comes from the top. So I think it was just a month ago, our chief legal officer got up and talked about how he, over the last 2 years, has actually stopped working on his vacations because he realized that everyone on his team was working all the time because he was. And so he changed his life and his behavior to do that. Or this is a little bit inside baseball, but after Atlassian IPO'd in 2015, our CEOs were supposed to fly to Austin and San Francisco. And right after the IPO, Mike Cannon-Brookes actually emailed the whole company and said, hey, I'm so sorry. I wanted to come, celebrate with you because you all made this possible, but I miss my family and I'm staying here with them for the week. And what that means for the CEO to be like, I'm sorry, I am not working. When his wife had to go to Fashion Week, he took 4 days off because he was like, I have to take care of my kids. And so it's getting male role models to pick that up so that men in the organization do that. And then also creating structures while the change is happening that allows women, to leave at whatever time they need to take care of that. And then also providing a little extra help on the side when they might need it. And that's gender non-specific, but we know that women tend to need it more than men do.
Yeah, I'm a single mom of two, 10 and 12. And I've been on this executive journey now for about 5 years. And there are some companies that get it and some companies that don't, right? I had a role with GE Capital where I was remote. I worked remote. It was an incident response director role. It's an executive role. GE gets it, right? They don't punish you for not being there. There are other companies that want you in the office, and there has to be a give, right? And it becomes a hunting exercise. As soon as I get an announcement about a job opening, I'm on top 10 places to work for women, top 100 places to work for women, top 100 for working mothers, and I'm hunting companies that actually have a more inclusive understanding of those challenges, because teleworking, especially in our field, it's not that big of a deal. And actually, I work more hours when I'm at home than I do in the office, because literally there's so much distraction. I'm one of those people that will prefer to be at home because, see, my computer stays up all the time. And I was a incident response. I was a director of the Security Operations Center. That means at any given day, you can call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and I had to get up, right? Because there was an incident. So there are some companies out there that are better than others when it comes to that. And as a mother yourself, you just have to hunt those companies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you guys very much. I've really enjoyed this. My name's Sandra Capri. I've worked for Fortune 500 technical companies for over 30 years. And just recently I've started working for, I guess you'd call it a Fortune 4 billion company, small company, 10 people. I don't know how to characterize it otherwise. I've been made the CTO of the company, and I'm wondering, what is it that the CEO, the CTO, and other ones of us in our company, and we have very good relationships with other small businesses in our area, what can we do as small businesses to help this whole problem?
Well, you know what? I was at lunch with a small startup that he made the comment that he was the only man on his executive leadership team. He had a COO, I think, his legal counsel, they were all women. He was the only guy. So I think it depends on what you do in the company culture and the hiring practices and doing similar things that we're asking for large companies to do, which is be aware, just be conscious.
Well, that helps in the company. I'm thinking more, what can we do to help the global? Sorry, I wasn't very
Be
specific.
visible, right? Be the role model that my daughter can look at. Say, there's a female CTO right there. I can be that if I want to be. There's not enough of that we can point to. So
Come on stage with us. Come
yeah.
Oh my. Goodness, no. You guys are doing wonderfully.
No, it's true. Leanne Pittsford, who's the CEO of Lesbians Who Tech, everyone's like, what can I do? And she's like, just show up.
Right.
Like, that's literally the only thing she ever asks of anyone. And one thing that you can do that I'm on this like Atlassian mission to do, which is I'm not letting anyone else who's a minority talk about being a minority at any professional event. Like, I get paid to talk about diversity, so I'll talk about it. But like, I have this really brilliant designer, and she's like, I want to talk about the work I do in the ERGs. I'm like, no, go crush it and talk about the awesome product design that you're doing, right? Because there are lots and lots of people doing that, and so I've been pushing everybody, like you said, technical things.
Yeah.
Probably quite a few.
A little bit.
And so it's like making sure that you show up and you show up as like an expert in that, and that you own the title of expert, because that solves the role model problem. And it turns out that the word expert is actually super male gendered, and the only way to change that is by people seeing, women, underrepresented racial minorities, people with disabilities, veterans, owning that word too. And that has more ripple effects than I think anyone can actually capture, but it's real.
Yeah, I think those are that's probably the most brilliant example. If you look at where we're at today, right? Think about what we would call some of the most innovative minds or innovative people in Silicon Valley. My guess is 9 times out of 10, you're going to think about a male or somebody but that's not the case of actually who did a lot of the work. And so being able to say, you know what, let's bring forward that technical expertise, being able to, whether it's, part of Girls Who Code or, any of those types of organizations, those create visible role models. And I think that regardless of your organization size, that's something you can absolutely contribute.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So before we sign off, I just wanted to remind you we're having a reception in the back for some networking. The folks from the EWF are here, the Women in Security and Privacy, and hopefully our panelists will stick around to have a drink. They probably need one after sitting up here for an hour and a half. I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll spread the word, about some of the things we talked about, and that we can keep the conversation going. I want to thank Mary Cheney, Rick Howard, Aubrey Blanche, and Anthony Johnson for enlightening me a lot today and having a great conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, but thank you very much.
Yeah.